Great.
Perfect. The problem. Let's try this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. 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 I think that we have settled the problem, and the meeting should be recorded now. I think that you all got the message recording. The recording has started. It's a great pleasure to have a talk by Marijana Ricl, who will not be talking about the subject that she usually addresses, that is Greek inscriptions, but something entirely different. She is currently working on Plato, or works that are attributed to Plato. She was a member at the Institute in a very dramatic year when we had a terrible hurricane. And we were all left without heating, water, electricity, and so on for approximately 10 days. But this has not changed her feelings towards the Institute. And it's a great pleasure to have her today. As I informed everyone, she will not be talking about Socrates' diving sign, but about Socrates' divine sign. And Marijana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angelos. Thank you all for coming. And let's talk about Socrates. So, one of Socrates' eccentricities, both in his own time and place and today, is his Daimonion. Socrates' Daimonion has been a source of embarrassment ever since, to modern scholars especially, many modern scholars. The problem for them is that Socrates is supposed to be a paragon of rationality, who would not allow irrational nonsense, as they view his Daimonion, to influence his thoughts or actions. In doing so, modern scholars, many of them, seem to think that Socrates lived in a void, divorced from his own time and place, an atopos, indeed, as some ancient sources characterize him. But let's leave them to their worries, while we keep our minds on both the period and the society in which Socrates lived, and on the complexity of his personality. I will be discussing, of course, Xenophon and Plato, because they are all we have, or almost all we have. So Xenophon discusses Socrates' Daimonion in his Memorabilia, in his Apology, and in his Symposium. Plato discusses the Daimonion in Apology, in Phaedrus, in Republic, in the Theaetetus, in Euthyphro, Euthydemus, Theagris, and Alcibiades Major. The reports by Xenophon and Plato essentially coincide as far as the Daimonion is concerned, although they are not completely identical, as you will soon see. Due to the very unfortunate loss of all the minor Socratics, we have no attestations outside the works of two best-known companions of Socrates, but we do find some interesting independent testimonies on the Daimonion in the Middle Platonic and Neoplatonic sources. So from the 1st century BC to the 5th century AD. But I will not have time today to talk about them anyway. Those sources, later sources themselves, will probably go back to the minor Socratics, lost to us today, and to some lost Hellenistic sources, biographical mostly, that we know existed and concerned themselves with Socrates. Because etymologies are very important, we should start with etymologies. I will start with etymologies this talk. So at the root of the noun to daimonion stands the word hodaimon, of course, just as at the root of the word to theon, deity, stands the word hotheos. Daimon, I will start with that, is a theological and philosophical term with a very wide semantic spectrum. From a concrete, personalized deity, any deity at all, via unknown divine force, then destiny, that's one meaning of the word daimon. Also secondary divinity, whether protector or avenger, we shall come back to that, to the personal daimon. This is very important. So there is something called personal daimon dwelling in the human soul or its best rational part. Already Democritus says, psyche oiketerion daimonos. So daimon lives in the soul. In Plato, the word daimon has several meanings. It designates, first of all, Eros, so the god of love, in the Symposium. And Eros is a mediator between humans and gods. In the Republic and the Phaedo, we find a personal daimon. So a personal daimon chosen or assigned to the soul before incarnation. And this personal daimon is a guardian of human life with a duty to ensure the fulfillment of a particular destiny. In Laws, Plato mentions the souls of people from the age of Kronos who became daimones, protectors of the human race. This is, of course, taken from Hesiod. Finally, in the Timaeus, in Plato's cosmological and psychological theory, daimon is equated with the human soul. Now, we already saw that already in Democritus, with the human soul or the divine element in man, and its best part, the mind, nous, as man's true protector. Caring for this inner daimon, so-called daimon synoikos, brings happiness, or eudaimonia. To daimonion itself is a substantivized adjective, daimonios, daimonia, daimonion. The adjective daimonios means belonging to a daimon or a god, inspired or sent by a god. Demonic, divine, extraordinary, heaven sent. It can refer to a god or a goddess. For example, in Simonides, Aphrodite or Cypris is daimonia. It can also refer to a man or a woman, in which case it means either ill-fated or blessed. And daimonia occurs in this use very frequently in Plato's dialogues. It can also refer, the adjective, of course, to anything sent by the gods. So fear, fortune, illness, name, necessity, dream, whatever the gods sent to the humans. The neuter form of the noun to daimonion points to the abstractness of its meaning. The noun to daimonion appears in Greek literature about the same time Socrates started using it to describe his own experience with the divine. The earliest texts in which we find it are the tragedies of Euripides and the history of Herodotus. In the 5th and the 4th centuries BC, the word to daimonion is either synonymous with theos and theon. So Aristotle, among others, talks about this in his rhetoric, and refers to a personalized, but mostly anonymous divine entity. So the same case is with Socrates. Or it designates a demonic being different from the gods and mediating between gods and humans. When discussing Socrates' daimonion, Xenophon uses only the noun form to daimonion, without exception. So only to daimonion as a noun. While in Plato, the noun and the adjective forms are equally represented, half-half. In Plato, the adjective daimonios is twice followed by the noun semeion, so sign or omen, divine sign, and once by phone or voice, and enantioma, obstacle. We shall see later these cases. And you have them on your handout. I have decided to structure my talk today about Socrates' daimonion as a series of questions and replies to those questions found in Xenophon and Plato. The first question would be, when did the daimonion first appear to Socrates? Plato says in his childhood, ever since he was a child. So those are numbers 9 and 22 on your handout. Did Socrates ever solicit a sign from the daimonion? The answer is no. The daimonion spoke, if we can say so, to Socrates spontaneously, without any initiative on his part. We could even say that it imposed itself on Socrates. In other words, Socrates did not resort to any techniques that would prompt the appearance of the daimonion. There was no communication between Socrates and the daimonion that would prompt the daimonion to appear to him. It appeared spontaneously, automatically. How frequently did the signs occur? Both sources, both Plato and Xenophon, say they occurred very frequently. They could occur at any moment during Socrates' normal day. Often with regard to very trivial matters, as Socrates says himself. Number 10 on your handout. Socrates usually refers to these events with the phrase gignetai moi. It happens to me, emphasizing, so that's number 9, 12, 16, and 17, emphasizing the automatic nature of the intervention, of the divine intervention. Another question we could ask is, was Socrates' daimonion a secret in Athens? And we know the answer, of course, it was not a secret. Actually, Socrates had not kept his belief that he received signs from a daimonion a secret, and he often spoke about it in various places. So he says, both in Xenophon and Plato, that the Athenians know about his daimonion. It's not a secret. Was this phenomenon rare or even unique to Socrates? Socrates himself maybe considered his daimonion a rare phenomenon, at least among the philosophers. As we see in Plato's Republic, where Socrates says that the daimonion repeatedly opposed his plans to practice politics and thus managed to keep him in philosophy. And he says maybe it happened to somebody else before him or to nobody. He's not sure. Did the daimonion play any role in Socrates' trial? Of course, we know already the answer to this question. The daimonion was the main reason for the accusation that Socrates did not believe in the gods, in which the city believed, and introduced new divine beings, kaina daimonia. Number 1, 7, and 16 on the handout. Neither Socrates himself, nor Xenophon or Plato had any doubt about this. Now we come to the more difficult questions. One of them is the daimonion a god or a god's messenger? Xenophon would reply with a no to the first part of the question. According to him, the daimonion was not a god itself, or whatever, it just transmitted messages from a god or gods to Socrates. That's what Xenophon says. But he continues, although it was so, Socrates spoke about his experience as he understood it, that the Daimonion sent him messages and revealed things to him. And often both Xenophon and Plato use the verb semaino or prosemaino, to give sign, to send a sign, to send an omen. Socrates taught, Xenophon also says, that this opinion of his, that the Daimonion sent him messages, was more accurate and pious than what other people said about other people who used divination and who relied on augury, on oracles, or on chance utterances and sacrifices said, because they attributed divine powers to birds or humans. They say a bird told me, or somebody's some chance utterance by a person coming by told me something, but it's really not pious to talk like that. Xenophon apologetically insists on a god or gods as the source of the signs. He says the Daimonion was only an intermediary between a god and Socrates, not a new god, whose cult he was introducing in Athens. But the god whose messages were supposedly conveyed to Socrates is never named, never, not in any of the passages, either in Xenophon or in Plato. The best candidate, of course, many people have thought, who could that be? And of course, the best candidate is certainly Apollo, not only the traditional patron of the prophetic art, but also the god whose connection with Socrates is well known. In Xenophon's Memorabilia and Apology, Socrates connects the Daimonion and the god in his reply, famous reply to a question from one of his followers on his reasons for not preparing a defense speech. He says, I quote, "Oh yes, Hermogenes," he answered, but when I did try to think out my defense to the jury, the Daimonion at once resisted, and Antioche to Daimonion. Do you think it's strange if it seems better to God, to Theo, that I should die now? So there is a God involved. In Plato, Socrates connects the Daimonion and the god in Apology, in Theaetetus, in Alcibiades Major, and Theagis. In Apology, Socrates comments on the relationship between gods and daimones, when he explains to the judges the nature of his daimonion. As in Xenophon, the context is apologetic. Socrates proves that a man who believes in daimones cannot be an atheist, since ordinary people consider daimones either gods or children of gods. He goes on to explain his avoidance of political activity by a ban issued by some divine and demonic voice. Theionti kai daimonion phone. So that's number 9. Finally, also in Apology, what was first referred to as his customary prophetic activity of the daimonion, number 10, hegar eiotia moi mantikeche to daimoniu, in the next sentence becomes the sign of the god, totut heu semeion. In the Theaetetus, Socrates says that the god is the one who allows him to accept new companions. In Alcibiades Major, whose authenticity is disputed by some modern scholars, although it was not disputed in antiquity, in 3 of the 4 attestations of the daimonion, God is the source of demonic prohibition, which prevented Socrates from approaching Alcibiades, and also the authority whose consent will be necessary for the young man's progress in the acquisition of virtue. The same anonymous god, the god is again anonymous, features as Socrates' guardian, Epitropos, number 20 in this dialogue. So the god is also his guardian. All in all, we could say that Socrates perhaps believed his daimonion was not so much a god himself as a messenger of a god. possibly of Apollo. How does the daimonion manifest itself to Socrates? The daimonion manifests itself to Socrates by signs, as I already said, both in Xenophon and Plato. All the testimonies suggest that these signs were sounds produced by a human-like being, let's say. I don't know how else to put it. And the phrases that are used is theophone, theontikai daimonion, phone, phonetis, tina phonen, and so on. This was those. So the signs were sounds produced, were sounds with a meaningful content. In other words, messages expressed through words. I'm almost certain of that. It was a vivid and arresting experience for Socrates. Of particular importance is the following example in Plato's Phaedrus, number 12. Intent on ending his conversation with Phaedrus and returning to the city, Socrates says that at that very moment that he was thinking about leaving, he heard a voice, tina phonen, forbidding him to leave before atoning for his offense, prinan aphosiosomai, as if he had sinned against Eros. So what Socrates heard on that occasion was not an inarticulate sound, simple noise, but a short message forbidding him to leave, obviously in Greek. Forbidding him to leave before atoning for his transgression against Eros. Since he felt unease already while he was delivering his first speech on Eros, it was easy for him to recognize what the mistake was, what the mistake he made was. We see that at least in some cases, the daimonion's manifestations were preceded by Socrates' anxiety, worry. And we might even identify this anxiety as Socrates' intuition before the daimonion signal itself. In Phaedrus, the daimonion signals to Socrates post festum, since it did not prevent him from making a mistake. This tells us that it could not prevent him from putting his plans in action in every situation. Spurred on by his passion for logoi, especially erotikoi logoi, Socrates delivers the first speech on Eros, directed against an infatuated Erastes, although he has a premonition, as he says himself, that he is slandering the god. He is using the word kategoria, hetu erotos kategoria, slandering the god by presenting love as something bad. We could say that it is the daimonion's duty to ensure that Socrates' actions follow his intuitions and his deepest beliefs. Now, another question is, did the signs from the daimonion concern only Socrates? They were sent to him, but did they concern only him? If we asked Plato this question, he would reply with a yes. Xenophon, though, has a different story. He claims that the signs sent by the daimonion concerned Socrates himself and the people close to him, his followers and his friends. Number 1 and 7 on the handout. This emphasis on the positive role of the daimonion in the lives of Socrates' friends is expected in a work such as Xenophon's Memorabilia, composed with the intention to show the value of daily association with Socrates and the injustice of the accusations that brought him to court. Plato passes over this aspect of the daimonion's activity without a comment. But we shall see later, it's not so black and white. He comes closest to it in the Theaetetus and Alcibiades Major, two dialogues focused on Socrates' pedagogical errors. However, since the decision to accept new companions or to start a love relationship and a mentor relationship with Alcibiades still concerned Socrates himself, not only Alcibiades or other students, disciples. We could say that even in those cases, the demonic sign was intended solely for Socrates. The dubious theages, this is one of the articles, one of the dialogues that was never considered dubious in antiquity, but it started to be considered dubious in the 19th century. So the dubious theages unreservedly follows Xenophon's version. It shows that bad things happened to Socrates' friends who disregarded the Daimonion's prohibitions. While Xenophon refrains from mentioning any concrete example of demonic signs referring to events in which Socrates himself did not participate, but were initiated or participated in by his companions and friends, Theages gives us details about 4 such cases where Socrates' Daimonion spoke about other people. No other surviving source has such an extensive report on Daimonion's concrete intervention. Over time, Socrates' advice to friends proved to be accurate and almost prophetic, and the belief in the prophetic nature of his demonic sign emerged. It is interesting that we know of no cases of demonic signs concerning Socrates' immediate or extended family, although it is almost impossible that there were none. Now is a very important question. Did the Daimonion only oppose or also encourage Socrates to do something? On the surface of it, Xenophon and Plato disagree on the general content of demonic signals to Socrates. Xenophon says that these signals sometimes opposed him and sometimes urged him to act. Number 1, on the handout, instructing him what to do and what not to do. Tamen poein, tademe poein, hatechre poein, kai chame, hate deoi, kai chame deoi poein, and so on. Plato, on the other hand, insists that the divine and demonic voice always opposed Socrates, always, and never led him in a more positive way. Number 9, ae apotrepe me tuto hoan melo pratein, and so on. Number 10, number 11, 12, in all the cases. So the demonic sign opposed him when he was about, according to Plato, opposed him when he was about to do something that was not right. Me orthos, pratein or praxein, or not good. Eimeti emelonego agathon praxein. In other words, the Daimonion has an apotreptic function in Socrates' life, according to Plato. When the signal comes, Socrates does not have to ponder on its meaning. He immediately knows he must stop what he's doing, whatever it is. But so he stops, but without understanding the reasons. The Daimonion never explains. The reasons make themselves clear later on. Actually, Socrates has to find the reasons for the prohibition. Only the demonic sign in Phaedrus, which I already mentioned, can be understood as an order to Socrates to atone for his sin. So he is urged not only to not to do something, but to do something, to atone for his sin, for the sin that he committed against Eros. So in order to do that, he makes a second speech, the famous Palinod, the second speech on love. In Theaetetus, we read that the Daimonion forbids Socrates to resume association with some former companions who come back to him, while it allows it, Plato says pareke or ea, is that 14 and 15, yes, on the handout. So it allows in some other cases. So some companions are forbidden from rejoining Socrates while some are allowed, but without any explanation. So it is not an absolute prohibition. opposition to what Socrates wants. In Alcibiades Major, number 19, Daimonion's activity can be understood in the same way as encouraging, perhaps, Socrates to talk to Alcibiades. And the verb used is an efekin. So literally, the god let him loose on Alcibiades, allowed him, but even more stronger than allowed, to talk to Alcibiades after preventing him previously to talk to him. But this has been used as proof of dialogue's inauthenticity. Again, by those who believe that dialogue was not written by Plato. The Daimonion sends signals only after Socrates had already made his decision to do something, not while he is just thinking about it. In other words, it opposes either products of Socrates' own deliberation or perhaps even his wishes. Based on his lifelong experience, Socrates inferred that the absence of demonic reaction equals to putting a divine seal of approval on his plans and giving him the green light, if we can say so, to implement them in practice. When the Daimonion did not oppose him, Socrates interpreted his silence as approval. And perhaps, as Xenophon says, even an encouragement to do something that he already had plans to do. A non-prohibition was a proof that the action Socrates proposes will not entail bad consequences for him or for other people. Frequent prohibitions, even in trivial matters, were enough of a hindrance in his life already, and the passive wait for the Daimonion sign to approve his every intention would make daily functioning impossible. Another important topic is the Daimonion's role in Socrates' pedagogical activity.
Is that your group?
The Daimonion had a major role in Socrates' work with his followers. Its signs are crucial both for the admission of new followers and for their advancement. From Theaetetus, we learn that some of Socrates' companions seem very ignorant, paniamathes, when they come to him, but that all those whom God allows, Hoisper an hotheospareike, show amazing progress. Those who leave Socrates prematurely then abort, as he says, what they still had in themselves and lose their previous offspring through bad upbringing, so that in the end they again seem ignorant to themselves and to others. When these former companions attempt to rejoin Socrates, that's number 15 on the handout, his Daimonion, I already said that, opposes further association with some of them, but with others it permits such association to take place, and they begin to make progress again. In Plato's texts, we get no explanation why some associates are rejected and others accepted. And the famous Platonic scholar, Vlastos, believed that the reason was what he called Socrates' hunch, that he actually had a hunch about different people. If we base ourselves on what we read in the Theages, we can assume that a small number of Socrates' companions, probably only those who never gave up on daily meeting with him, daily synosia, that's the word Plato uses, made up the only successful group of his disciples. The activity of the Daimonion in Theages is threefold. That's number 27 on the handout. It opposes an antiutai, the admission of many candidates to Socrates' circle, and for this reason, Socrates cannot meet with them. It does not prevent udiakoliae, many from meeting with Socrates, but they do not benefit from this. And in some rare cases, it contributes syllabatai to their work with Socrates, and their progress is quick. In this last privileged group, the benefit acquired by some is stable and lasting. But many, after leaving Socrates, return to the state they were in before coming to him, and are again no different from any other person, from other people. Again, we see that the daimonion is not infallible, because even in the group of favored companions, only a small number managed to permanently preserve the virtue acquired with the help from Socrates. Obviously, for success with Socrates, along with his daimonion, that is to say himself, we can say that already, and his affection and dedication to young people, the necessary ingredient is the appropriate character, will, talent, and continuous effort and habituation. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Because
Yes,
yes, the picture froze. Okay. Now, how did Socrates react to the signs of his daimonia? You can already guess, but you will hear more about it. Xenophon says with absolute compliance in all the cases. The justification of his trust, of Socrates' trust in his daimonion, seems to have come from his experience of repeated episodes of this phenomenon, which over time proved to be almost unfailingly reliable. He believed that gods cannot lie. He says so in Apology, in Plato's Apology. And Xenophon insists that all of Socrates' predictions given to friends were confirmed as correct in all the cases. Maybe he's exaggerating, I'm not sure. Socrates even calls himself a seer, mantis, in several of Plato's dialogues, but often with ironic undertones. As already said, Xenophon was well aware that the daimonion was the main reason for the accusation that Socrates was introducing new divine beings, unrecognized by the state. To counteract this accusation, he presents the daimonion as proof of Socrates' traditional religiosity, manifested in his use of prophecy in Memorabilia 1:1, as if Socrates were addressing himself to one of the famous pan-Hellenic oracles, Delphi, Dodona, or whatever. It is actually obvious that Socrates did not have to go to an oracle at all. Instead, he was considered a kind of an oracle himself. This is today called Socrates' mantic self-sufficiency. Because the sign of the daimonion is a form of divination, its interventions always require an interpretation. In his interpretations of demonic signs, Socrates relied on his firm belief that the gods know what every man does and thinks, and that they reward good people and punish the bad, that they do not send false or obscure signs incomprehensible to human mind, and that those signs complement the frail, inadequate human knowledge. For this reason, he looked for a rational interpretation and confirmation of the meaning and value of demonic messages sent to him, especially when they warned him away from actions traditionally acceptable and even desirable in Athens, like actively participating in political life of the city. On the other hand, his rich experience with demonic signs convinced him that these warnings were well-intentioned and reliable, and that the actions pursued in accordance with them had positive consequences, both for him and for his environment. We can even wonder if it was the signs' infallibility itself that convinced Socrates of their divine source, since only God can foresee the future reliably. Nevertheless, this was only his interpretation, as he points out on several occasions, and not absolute knowledge, because the daimonion never revealed to him the crucial meaning of his messages, maybe only in the Phaedrus, as we saw twice already. So the daimonion never revealed the crucial meaning of the messages, never went beyond the simple prohibition, never taught him anything directly, especially never taught him anything philosophical, any philosophy. In other words, his manifestations were not revelations, as, for example, in the Old Testament. Discovering the sense of these prohibitions was Socrates' job. Once he had become convinced of the reliability, general reliability of his demonic sign, Socrates could no longer be persuaded not to act in accordance with them. Xenophon says so, and Plato. This absolute subordination, which worries some modern researchers today, does not mean that Socrates did not occasionally test, if we can say so, the daimonion to see if at some point in the future it might allow him what it had previously forbidden, because such things happened. We know of at least 3 such cases, all 3 from the most crucial moments of Socrates' life. First is taking a decision to engage in politics. He tried several times and the daimonion opposed him on each occasion. Then starting a relationship with Alcibiades, which was also at some point opposed by the daimonion and then allowed. And preparing a defense speech. I already mentioned that. He tried twice to compose the speech, but the daimonion opposed it. In all these cases, Socrates made repeated attempts to realize his plans. But as we saw in the first 2 cases, so in the case of doing politics and starting a relationship with Alcibiades, the daimonion eventually lifted his opposition, stopped opposing him. Of course, the 3rd case was at the end of his life. If we look at those cases, participating in the political life and having a relationship with Alcibiades, not everybody would agree that the daimonion did the right thing by allowing it to Socrates. But anyway, that's what happened. Before I come to the conclusion of this talk, I would like very much to add a short note on the modern science of hearing voices. Researchers of Socrates' daimonion have been very reluctant to consult modern medicine, primarily its neurological and psychiatric disciplines. My impression was that if we approach them, so neurology and psychiatric, with an open mind and without prejudice, maybe there is much we can learn from them. Today, there is a whole science has been developed called the science on hearing voices. It deals, among other things, with the history of this phenomenon and studies other famous cases of historical persons who heard voices. The best known, of course, next to Socrates, is the case of Jeanne d'Arc from the early 15th century. In addition to voices, she was different a little bit. She also had visions, as Socrates did not. In the transcripts, which are preserved from her trial, we can find a number of similarities between her case and Socrates' case. For example, she first heard voices at the age of 12, and Plato says that he had almost the same, that the voices started in his childhood, doesn't say the exact age. Jeanne d'Arc also believed that the voices she heard came from the god and protected her. She also believed that they hinted at future events and that God gave her a mission through them. And in a way, Socrates believed the same thing. Although she heard differently from Socrates, she heard several different voices, actually 4, but they never sent her contradictory messages. Also, the voices appeared to her daily, both spontaneously and sometimes in response to her prayer. So that's a difference from Socrates. And she obeyed them unconditionally. When asked by the judges at the end of the trial if her fall into captivity meant that her angel, as they said, had betrayed her, she replied that it was God's wish and better for her to die, as if she had read Plato's and Xenophon's apology. Unlike Socrates, she, as I said, she heard 4 different voices, belonged to archangels Michael and Gabriel, Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret. The theological status of archangels and saints is very close to that of Socrates' Daimonion, since they are also mediators between the god and humans. All 4 addressed her in French, of course, otherwise she wouldn't understand them, in pleasant and deep voices. That's how she described the occurrences. Similarly, as in Socrates' case, her statements about the frequent appearance of voices were considered lies and empty boasting. And she, not unlike him, refused to describe these events in detail. Whatever the nature of her visions and voices, she took them very seriously, same as Socrates. They had a dramatic impact on her life and led to her death at the stake at the age of 19. The French philosopher Voltaire, in one of his letters on the English, said the following thing about Socrates. A man who claims to be accompanied by a personal daimon, or he said genius, must be either a scoundrel or a madman. Thank you, Voltaire, very much. From the point of view of modern medicine, Socrates was neither either a scoundrel or a madman. Socrates would certainly not be the only such case, either in his time or today. Today, he would be diagnosed as a healthy person with auditory verbal hallucinations, or AVH, a well-known and described condition, very studied condition, whose current definition is the following. Hearing speech in the absence of corresponding external stimulation of the ear with a sufficient sense of reality to resemble a veridical perception over which the subject does not feel she or he has direct and voluntary control, and which occurs in the awake state. In no way are these voices the random production of a diseased brain, because the content of the voices is meaningful to individuals hearing them. AVH symptoms in the general healthy population reach about 5%. 5% of healthy persons hear voices at some point in their lives. And these occurrences seem to, and the hearing of voices often seems to occur under conditions of extreme stress or in a problematic period in one's life. So that the voices often have a highly beneficial function in these circumstances. Most large-scale studies show that around 5 to 10% of children and adolescents will hear voices during their lives. From an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense that we should have the capacity to generate these voices that save, as they call them today sometimes. However, why they should need to be experienced as non-self-produced is unclear. It may be that, that the force of such auditions and their tendency to take the form of a command, which compels one to perform the action, make them more effective than simply our normal thoughts in such circumstances. Conclusion. Socrates' Daimonion was controversial for all but himself and his closest friends. So controversial that it figured in the first count of the indictment that led to his death. There was maybe something disturbing about the fact that a human being who is not possessed by the god as the Delphic prophetess, nor mad, claims to receive prophetic signs from gods or daimones. That is why many contemporaries considered Socrates a liar and a braggart, or at best a joker. and tried to trivialize his experience. Socrates himself was certain that the signs he received did not come from his own soul, but from something from the divine world, difficult to define and almost impossible to name. Although he could expect a divine intrusion into his everyday life at any time, it seems that the Daimonion's unpredictability did not cause him stress. He accepted it as something positive and reconciled with it because of his conviction that the gods were omniscient benefactors. The Daimonion was not a burden, but a gift from the gods. Actually, he says in one place in Plato, it was a thea moira, a gift from the gods, and a sign of their affection and care, not any lie or pretext for anything on his side. By a very lucky chance, I came upon Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy delivered between 1805 and 1818 in Vienna, Heidelberg, and Berlin. His interpretations of Socrates' Daimonia are so illuminating and, in my modest opinion, far above anything attempted today. I suppose it takes a great philosopher to understand another great philosopher. Let me therefore spend a couple of minutes on Hegel's interpretations of the Daimonion. According to Hegel, Socrates' Daimonion is neither a tutelary deity nor moral conscience, but what he variously terms the major conversion of world history, the main turning point of the spirit in its interiority, and the beginning of the freedom which knows itself and which therefore is true freedom. With the Daimonion, Hegel says it is still the non-conscious, the exterior, which decides, and yet it is something subjective. Socrates is pushed by the Daimonion. At the same time, this oracle, if we can call it so, is nothing external. It is his oracle, a residue of exteriority at the very heart of the acquired interiority. The Daimonion, therefore, occupies the middle between the exteriority of the oracle and the pure interiority of the mind. It is something interior, but represented as a genius, as something different from the human will, and not as his prudence, his free will. Hegel then offers a truly clinic description of the Socratic soul, prey to the doubling, as he calls it, the doubling of the consciousness, and to sleepwalking, and he establishes a link between the Daimonion and the cataleptic state in which, as Plato tells us in the Symposium, Socrates falls sometimes. The Daimonion must therefore be considered, says Hegel, a physiological manner of being, or the return to oneself, both morbid and necessary. The conversion of the spirit has only just begun. While praising Hegel, let me note that not every great philosopher understands Socrates. For example, Nietzsche or Voltaire, as I mentioned, who said that Socrates must have been a scoundrel or a madman. As a child of his times, Socrates found the origin of the unusual phenomenon he faced since childhood, not in himself, but in the world of gods and daimonists. On the other hand, his belief in the Daimonion's infallibility was rationally based on the positive experience gained over the years. It is clear to us that his Daimonion is nothing but himself, his thoughts, his intuition, his desires, his conscious, his subconsciousness, depending on the situation in which it appeared. Seth Bernadette also found the right words in his dissertation on the Theages. Seth says, his was not an accidental humor or disease, nor a supernatural appendage that commanded or forbade against his own inclinations, but the Daimonion was his very revulsions and desires. As a noble nature intrinsically pleased him, so his Daimonion detected it. And as that nature precedes all adornment by art, so its discoverer, the Daimonion, attending him from childhood, was instantly attracted. It may have become stronger and more refined through use, it could never change. When there was no tension between what Socrates wanted to do and his understanding of what's good and just, the Daimonion was silent. He appeared only when Socrates had to be prevented from betraying and harming himself out of inadvertence or weakness, or when he and his friends were threatened by some external danger. Through his signs, it confirmed Socrates' correct opinion. The Daimonion was a divine gift to Socrates, and so was his life's calling, his love for Alcibiades, and his death. Divine guardian and guide, life's mission, love for Alcibiades, dignified death. These were the gifts by which the gods showed their affection for Socrates. He gratefully received those gifts, respected them, and dealt with them as best he could. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marijana. Thank you very much for this very interesting, thorough discussion of fascinating subject. And the fact that your talk was so well structured allowed us to follow without any difficulty the various questions that you asked and the answers that you have given. This was really a real treat. As it often happens in this discussion, I am unable to see those who raise their hands. So if you want to say something, just unmute yourself and speak aloud. I see that David wants to ask a question. But before I give you the word, I have the privilege to be the first one who asks a question or makes a remark.
I am sorry, Angelos. Could you just move to your left, to the next seat on the left, because I cannot see you and it's awkward. I would like to see you while you're talking, if it's not a problem. Thank you very much. Now it's better.
And let me take the position of Voltaire. That Socrates is actually a scoundrel. And let me explain why. From what we can judge from all the references to the Daimonion is not very eloquent. It just says no. It doesn't argue. It doesn't provide any moral arguments. It just says don't do it. In this respect, it resembles contemporary divination, for instance, in the sanctuary at Dodona, where the visitors usually write two versions of their question and expect the god to say yes, no.
Exactly.
Yeah, should I become a mercenary soldier? Should I not become a mercenary soldier? Then one of the two tablets is selected and the answer is there. In addition to this, we actually only know that Socrates followed the Daimonion. We don't have any case in which the Daimonion said, don't do it, and Socrates did it. What happened in these cases? Is the Daimonion infallible, or is just Socrates telling us that he has always followed the Daimonion because he has always followed his own personal, as you mentioned towards the end, his own personal will. So again, to play the advocatus diaboli, we have a contradiction between two things. On the one hand, Socrates presenting himself as a very pious person, listening to the voice of the god and behaving accordingly. And on the other hand, we have the other Socrates, who is the Socrates who does whatever he likes without giving any explanation and using the Daimonion as his excuse. That is, and this lifts the opposition between free will, which Socrates had, and the obligations that are imposed by a divinity. So as I said, I'm playing the advocatus diaboli. I'm not saying that I believe what I said, but I would like to see how you respond to this post-Voltaire.
Well, I must say, I also thought about this a lot, and sometimes I was tempted to give the same, to have this the same solution, or to think the same way that you are maybe not thinking, but just for the sake of discussion. what we know is what we get. I mean, what we don't have, we don't know. And of course, what we have is all apologetically written, first of all. I don't know. Of course, there is a famous passage in Xenophon's Symposium, not in Plato's Xenophon's Symposium, where Antisthenes, so one of the best known companions of Socrates, is having a discussion with Socrates, and they're talking about love and who is in love with whom and so on. And Socrates asks Antisthenes, so Antisthenes, are you in love with somebody? And he says, yes, of course, I'm in love with you very much, because everybody was in love with Socrates. But then Antisthenes continues, you never want to speak to me. You always find some reason not to speak to me, and often you use the Daimonion as an excuse. So you use the Daimonion not to speak to him. You tell me that the sign has appeared, I cannot speak to you. So this is, of course, said jokingly, but it tells us something. As I mentioned, I would say most people in Athens did not believe Socrates, and even some authors later, like for example, Plutarch has a famous like a dialogue on the Daimonion of Socrates, and the discussion of the Daimonion starts in the way that somebody says, should we consider this Daimonion a lie or something else? Is it a lie? Was he lying? I personally believe he was not lying. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. As I said, this was just for the sake of the discussion and the.
I confess I had the same thoughts at times.
And it's interesting also that whenever the trial of Socrates has been reenacted, Socrates has been convicted. So a lot of people think that he was really going too far. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think my question sort of takes off a bit from your comment, Angelos. The people hearing voices hear voices which are also culturally conditioned.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm also thinking, for instance, of the Salem witch trials, where everybody had the same idea of sort of basically what witches did and were able to reproduce it in the same way. It's the same idea of hearing voices, etc. So there's a sense in which later people may decide that the voices you hear are a sign that you're a fraud. But your contemporaries are all very much aware that this is an expected form of divine communication. So, I mean, there's a sense, I would think, that when Socrates is referring to to Daimonion as his negative guide, he is quite plausibly one of many who would be saying these things, which is why Plato doesn't have any trouble having him do it, say it, why Xenophon doesn't have any trouble portraying this as a positive thing, because this is, in most people, seen as a positive. Now, even though, as I say, the English don't want to hear that Jeanne d'Arc is listening to angels in French any more than we would now take seriously anything that was said by people in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. But these are, critical cultural markers, it seems.
Yes, I have read some modern studies on people who today seem to hear voices. And these reports and studies are published in medical journals, and they seem reliable. And people do hear voices. As I said, almost 5% of, that's the current statistics, 5% among the healthy people, completely healthy people. In the schizophrenic category, the percentage is almost 30% of them hear voices, and the voices are different in the two groups. The voices in the group of people who have some diagnosis, like psychiatric, they are mostly very negative and hurtful to the people who hear them, while in the other group, the healthy population, the voices are either neutral or positive. So, and those, when I read those studies, they didn't look like the people were lying. Like, probably heard something, whatever it was. And there were some tests on the brain performed on the groups that were used in the study. And it seems that one part of the brain, which is, I think, I don't remember what it's called, but it's somewhere here in the temporal lobe, I think that's the right name, which is also connected to epilepsy, has something to do with the hearing voice. So epilepsy, of course, there are different types of epilepsy, and some are not so threatening, less threatening than others. And so it seems that the same parts of the brain may cause attacks of epilepsy and hallucinations, either auditory or visual hallucinations. So I am not really, I don't know, I'm not ready to be skeptical about.
Well, things are really bad when the people who hear voices are the president of the United States.
I had no idea.
Iraq war. Andrei, you raised your hand or not?
No, I was just talking to my wife. I apologize.
Other remarks or questions? I have one that is related to another form of personal communication with the divine, which is the dream, and which is far more common. People had epiphanic dreams in antiquity, either unprovoked or sometimes provoked when they went, for instance, to an Asclepios sanctuary in order to get such a dream. And we, of course, Gil Renberg could tell us more about that. But it seems that at some point, seeing dreams and communicating with a god can become a habit. It is widespread because I had a dream. Other people also have dreams. I remember, for instance, that when I was reading William Harris's book on dreams, I remembered what I have dreamt during the night, whereas normally I don't do that because I am obsessed with the idea of dreams. So I think about it and I remember it. I assume that people saw dreams in the Asclepiae precisely for this reason. But surprisingly, the daimonion of Socrates did not become a custom, didn't become something that other people would like to have. And perhaps the fact that Socrates was executed contributed to prevented other people. So it served as a daimonion, preventing them from having, or if they heard voices, from telling others that they have heard voices. But do we have any information about, like Jeanne d'Arc, for instance, about other people in antiquity who
yes, first of all, daimonion was something very personal. So this was like a particular daimonion of Socrates and nobody else. And
yeah, but the phenomenon of having a daimonion is not personal to Socrates. Anyone?
Yeah, only this daimonion is his own. What you ask, there's very little, of course, in the sources, but Plutarch, in the same dialogue that I mentioned in his work on the daimonion, represents one of Socrates' disciples, Simmias from Thebes, and of course the whole thing happens. The whole plot of the work takes place in Thebes, Simios asked about the Daimonion. So the event is about 20 years after Socrates' death. They ask him, I mean, the other people who are present there ask Simios because he knows he's the only one who has had any direct experience with Socrates. So they ask him to give them details if he knows about the Daimonion. He says the following. I asked him once, if we can believe it, we don't know where Plutarch got this. I asked Socrates once about the Daimonion and he didn't say anything. He did not reply at all. And but I know, and I realized that he was not willing to talk about it. So I never asked him again. That's what Simios says. But I know that he used to think that the people who reported that they had visions of gods, that he would say that they were lying, that they were liars. But if he heard, or if he met somebody who mentioned that he heard a voice or something, he was very interested and he would sit down and talk to these people and ask them all sorts of questions. So this is what Simios says. And then he continues, on the basis of this, we, his disciples, because he didn't want to talk about it to us, we sort of concluded that that's what his daimonion was. Voice, not a vision, and seems to be true.
Yeah.
That's all. So there were other people, of course, like today, but we don't hear much about it.
Gil Renberg wants to say something on the subject.
Mhm.
You have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you.
Oh, no, false alarm. I was just joking when you said that I could say more about dreams. I just said I could.
Okay.
So, but I know we're pressed for time, so I won't. But I
Okay.
enjoyed the talk, and then I'll mute myself.
Okay. I don't see any raised hands or, yes, Aaron.
Thinking in terms of the scoundrel mentioned by Voltaire, that some of that probably has to do with sort of the perception of the use to which the hearing of the voice is put, and you know, this kind of fits with Jeanne d'Arc as well, that if she had hung out in her local church and helped people with whatever small things they needed and not gotten involved with a war, the way that the English thought about her and her voices would probably have been different. And similarly, when I think about hearing voices, I often think about televangelists in a modern sense, and people who claim to hear the voice of God, and often use it specifically to raise money for themselves, to make money. And that strikes me as something where my initial response might be scoundrel, in a way that, you know, if I met someone who was a part of a church choir in some small church somewhere, and they said, yeah, I've heard this and I've helped some people out around the church, that wouldn't be necessarily my immediate response in the same way. So I wonder if Socrates gets caught up in some of that because, you know, one, some of his students end up taking over the state and killing a lot of people. Two, he does accept payment for some of the teaching that he does, or certainly people with whom he's associated do. So there may be some either accurate or inaccurate assessments by his contemporaries that he's sort of using the daimonion, using conversations with a divine power, or made up conversations with a divine power to ends that make him, you know, kind of scoundrel-esque.
I don't think so. I don't think that was the case. When sources talk about the negative reception of his daimonion, they mostly say that people thought it was a lie, but maybe a white lie, not something that he could use in a very negative way. Or they say that it was a joke, or they say that he was a lazon, so a braggart. He presented himself like having a direct line to the god, Apollo or whoever. And Plato says, and Xenophon, I think, says also that the jury at the trial, when he talked about the daimonion, they were jealous. That was jealousy. Most of all, that was the reaction. Like, why would he have the daimonion and we don't have it? Because really having this type of divine guide inside of you makes your life easier in a way. Also maybe more difficult because it stops you, but at least it stops you from doing something very bad. So it was mostly jealousy or yeah, not anything sinister. At least I don't remember finding anything like that. Maybe Voltaire had that in mind. I don't know. He was thinking about his own time. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this really very interesting talk. And our next meeting is next Tuesday. I'm going to send you, as usual, the invitation with my usual typos, because I'm practically blind and I have a bad screen. So thank you again. Stay healthy, everyone, and see you in the next meeting. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.